Welcome everyone to the third annual Richard W. Blackburn Endowed Lecture on Civility and Integrity, and a special welcome to our class of 2019. They're the ones sitting over in this area over here, looking very intelligent and very professional. Welcome all of you. This lecture series was endowed through a gift from Trustee Richard Blackburn to the School of Business. Trustee Blackburn is a generous alumnus of GW, and if I can suggest to the class of 2019, gifts like this are what successful alumni do. So just keep that in mind. Trustee Blackburn's gift supports an annual lecture by a world-recognized leader addressing the themes of civility and integrity in business and public life. So we're delighted to welcome this year's guest speaker, the Honorable Mac McLarty. Tonight's lecture and discussion, entitled Can Civility Survive? Lessons from Private Business and Public Life, is particularly timely and underscores our curriculum on ethical leadership and social responsibility. It's our goal that students acquire the knowledge and skills to contribute to society in interesting ways. This event also serves as a signature event for our first-year business students. Each year, in our first-year development program, each of the 400 students writes oath of honor. The oath is something that they and their peers can commit to as business students now and as business professionals going forward. And after looking at all 400 oaths, 4 authors were selected as the finalists. So I'd like you to welcome them on stage as I call their names. Agnes Charlotte Broden. There we go. Ryan Robinson. See how Ryan does. There we go. Julia Rondos and Philip Yellen. So these are the top 1%, the 4 out of 400. We appreciate all of their efforts at drafting an oath of honor that all of our students can live by. And now it's my honor to announce this year's winner, Julia Rondos. So Julia, if you'll please lead the class of 2019 in reciting together their oath of honor.
Thank you. All right, good evening, class of 2019. Will you all please rise, look at the screen, and recite the oath of honor with me? As George Washington University Business School students, we agree to uphold the requirements and responsibility invested in us as we pursue our business careers. We agree to challenge ourselves as well as our peers constructively. We agree to work together by supporting one another in all of our endeavors and celebrating our achievement. We agree to push our boundaries and work hard at achieving accomplishments that seem unattainable. We understand that nothing is unachievable if we have the drive and passion to accomplish it. We agree to create a bright future for all of us as a GWSB community. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dean of the George Washington School of Business, Linda Livingstone.
Well, good evening and welcome and congratulations to Julia and the other 3 finalists. What a wonderful oath that was and so representative of what we're trying to accomplish here at the university and at the George Washington School of Business. Really, as Dean Morrison said, integrity, ethics, civility are really at the cornerstone of what we're trying to accomplish here, and really to prepare you as the next generation of sort of moral, civil business leaders that do their work with integrity. So we're pleased to be here and to honor all of you this evening. I'm delighted to be able to introduce Trustee Richard Blackburn, who is the namesake and the donor in support of our event this evening. We're happy to have his wife Nancy with us. Nancy, if you would wave at the audience. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, it's an honor to introduce Trustee Blackburn. He is a generous supporter of the university in so many ways, certainly serving as a trustee of the university for many years, as well as giving generously for this and other causes at the university. The Richard Blackburn Endowed Lecture on Civility and Integrity serves as an exciting opportunity for our students to learn about integrity in business conduct and civility in discourse from world-renowned speakers. Trustee Blackburn's enduring leadership at George Washington is inspiring, as well as a testament to his continued passion for his alma mater. He's also been an exceptional leader in the business realm, serving for over 30 years in the telecommunications industry. And then later, he retired from Duke Energy Corporation in 2004 after 7 years as Executive Vice President and General Counsel, the last year of which he also served as Chief Administration Officer. He recently began a new 2-year term as director of Group, a public company with products in magnetic and battery technologies, photomasks, advanced organics, and electronic chemicals. So it is my distinct honor to welcome Trustee Richard Blackburn.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you and good evening. I already said my wife Nancy is here tonight, and she and I are very pleased that you're taking some time to do what? Talk about civility and integrity? Why do we do that? How do we do that in a year like this, our election year? Is there room to talk about that? Is it okay? I'm going to resist the temptation to talk about the election because I think our guest speaker tonight is well equipped to give us some important insights. So I'll shy away from that. But what I'd like to do is just take a minute to talk about why I think civility and integrity are such important concepts. You know, you really can't do much of anything in this world by yourself. You can do a few things. But to achieve greatness, you need other people. You need to work with other people. You need to share ideas. You need to compromise. You need to innovate. You need to create, and you can't do that by yourself. And by the way, none of that works if you don't trust your colleagues. I recall a rather unfortunate incident in my young career as a lawyer. I was practicing law in New York. We were in the middle of a major problem that seemed to be unsolvable. We spent a long, difficult afternoon and couldn't seem to break through to something that made sense. And after the meeting, a colleague and I went off and had a drink and said, gosh, can't we think about this differently? And we did. For an hour, we held forth with different ideas, and I actually was very proud of the good ideas I had and shared with my colleague. And looking forward then to the next morning when we would reconvene with a larger group. I look forward to that until the next morning. Because the next morning, my colleague proceeded to advance my ideas as his own and proceeded to take full credit for the merit of those ideas. I never trusted him again. I never shared an original thought with him again. Trust is absolutely vital to working with other people to produce, create, innovate, so forth. So how do you get the trust? Well, you earn it. And the first thing you do is you pay attention to something called integrity. I will trust you if I think you're a person of integrity. I'll trust you if I believe you will almost always do the right thing. I'll trust you if I believe you will always do what you say you will do. I'll trust you if you're honest. I'll trust you if you have integrity. But that needs to be earned. one transaction at a time, one interchange at a time, one relationship at a time, and how do you do that? And it's all about how we treat people. I will trust you if you treat me well, if you listen to me, if you listen for understanding, as opposed to formulating your debating point that you're going to use to talk over me. I'll trust you if you're careful with your words and your tone, and I can watch you treat me and treat other people with respect. We call that civility. It's an enabler. It's the way we build and sustain trust. And without trust, none of this works. Trust, in my experience, is absolutely required for success in the practice of law. I've done that. Trust is required for success in business. I've done that. Trust is absolutely required for success in public policy. And just look at the country today, and look at the problems we have today in our political system, and answer the question, how much of that is due to a major deficiency in what? Trust. Indeed, I would argue that trust is required, essential for success in life. So that's what it is. That's what civility and integrity are all about. It's a great privilege to be part of this annual event to talk about it. It's a great thrill to have you here tonight to talk about it and to have a chance to listen to a world leader share thoughts on this important subject. So thank you for being here, and it's now my privilege to introduce the president of this great university, Stephen Knapp. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Blackburn. It is a delight to be back here for the third of these wonderful annual events, and I think it's just an extraordinary achievement and accomplishment on the part of Trustee Blackburn, have the vision to start something like this, which I think gets our class of 2019 focused on what will be important for them, not just as they go through their careers here, but for the rest of their lives as they help to build the enterprises of this nation and the world beyond. So I'm grateful, Trustee Blackburn, for your generosity in establishing the lecture. I also want to extend a special welcome to Nancy, who's already been recognized. And I'd like to acknowledge the members of our Board of Trustees who are here. First, Nelson Carbonell, the Chair of the Board of Trustees, right here. We have a number of other trustees, Wes Burnett, Mark Chichester, Peter Kovler, and James Humphreys. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I think it's already been noted that civility and integrity, which are values that Dick Blackburn both personifies and inspires in all who know him, are also values that we strive to instill in our students and in our university community. And in fact, we often talk about the heritage of George Washington and what he was trying to accomplish by creating a university that would educate citizen leaders. And there's no question that civility and integrity are at the core of that. He was known as, above all, as a figure of integrity by all of his contemporaries. One of the reasons they thought he was the indispensable founder of the nation. And in fact, as many of you may know, he wrote a book on civility very early in his life while he was still a teenager, in fact. And so I'm glad to be able to introduce tonight's speaker, who I think will illuminate the subject of civility and integrity in a variety of ways. And our speaker is really an extraordinary individual, an accomplished business leader and distinguished public servant, the Honorable Mac McClarty. He's currently chairman of McClarty Associates, an international strategic advisory firm that he co-founded in 1998. He's also chairman of the McClarty Companies, a fourth-generation family transportation business. Mr. McClarty served as President Bill Clinton's first White House Chief of Staff. Before entering the Clinton White House, he had served as an advisor to Presidents George H.W. Bush and Jimmy Carter. Outside the White House, he's held numerous distinguished positions throughout his long and varied career. In 1969, Mac McClarty was elected to the Arkansas House of Representatives at the age of only 23. From 1974 to 76, he served as the chair of the Arkansas Democratic Party. He was elected to the board of Arkla Incorporated, a Fortune 500 natural gas company in 1974, and he became its chairman and CEO in 1985. Under his leadership, Arkla became the nation's largest natural gas distributor. Mr. McClarty was appointed by President George H.W. Bush to the National Petroleum Council and the Council on Environmental Quality. He also served on the board of the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis from 1989 to 1992. As President Clinton's chief of staff, Mr. McClarty helped enact the historic 1993 Deficit Reduction Package, the North American Free Trade Agreement, the Family and Medical Leave Act, and landmark welfare reform legislation. Later, as counselor to President Clinton, he advised on domestic and international issues. He was appointed Special Envoy for the Americas in 1997. Mr. McClarty is the recipient of the Secretary of State's Distinguished Service Medal and the Center for the Study of the Presidency's Distinguished Service Award. He has also received the highest civilian honors of Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama, and Venezuela. His lecture this evening is titled, "Can Civility Survive? Lessons from Private Business and Public Life." So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mac McClarty.
Good evening. Thank you, President Knapp, Dean Livingstone, Dr. Morrison, Trustee Blackburn, and members of the George Washington University Board of Trustees. And President Knapp, thank you for a particularly warm and generous introduction, but more importantly, thank you for your dedicated and very capable leadership. And to all the distinguished faculty members, and most importantly, the students and guests who are here tonight, it's a special honor and a joy for me to be back on the campus of George Washington University, and particularly to participate in the Blackburn Lecture. So let me start by congratulating the students of the School of Business first-year development program. This is a pretty unique program. Your emphasis on skills and values and service is preparing you not only to make a good living, but it's preparing you to make for a good and meaningful life as well. And your honor code is an impressive example of that mission and your aspirations. And having listened to the honor code tonight, I just might encourage you to march right up to Pennsylvania Avenue and nail a copy of it right on the front door there, and a few other places around the city, I might add. And I'm really not kidding. I think you're qualified to do it. You'd be doing the country a service, and you certainly have the spirit and standing to do it. So congratulations to each and every one of you tonight. In that spirit, let me share some thoughts following on Dick Blackburn's very thoughtful comments about how values of civility and integrity have shaped American history and how they have influenced my experience in business and public service. Let me stipulate for the record, to use a legal term, that I share Trustee Blackburn's strong feeling about this subject. I am passionate about it and have been for a number of years. Simply put, strengthening these values is critical to our future. Without them, we will simply not be capable of addressing the urgent needs that are facing us today. We need them to move the country forward. When I was growing up in Hope, Arkansas, almost a half a century ago, civility and integrity were imparted to us like cardinal virtues. So much so that we sometimes thought they were handed down on stone tablets. And although we heard this message from about the time we could reason, we also saw it put into practice on a daily basis. Looking back, it was redeeming and impressive. And the message was simple. Civility was the essential building block of a strong community. integrity was the essential building block of a good person. Now, that's not to say we always accepted this message. These were rebellious times, and we had our own generation gap, believe it or not. And growing up in the South, we were no strangers to conflict. But looking back, I do think civility and integrity helped to guide us over time to the right side of history, to bend the arc, as President Obama likes to say. And these values produced real progress in the struggle against racism and injustice and inequality. And the nonviolent civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s was the gold standard of civility. Leaders like Dr. King were paragons of integrity. They were true to their word and their principles. And again, we have seen how civility and integrity go together, how they complement one another. Civility looks outward towards creating a better world. Integrity looks inward toward building character. And what's more, civility and integrity that Dick spoke of so thoughtfully and eloquently go to the very core of who we are as Americans. They address two basic elements of our national character: a commitment to the common good, our community, and the celebration of the individual and his or her talent and achievement. And that's why I am increasingly convinced that the assault on civility in America today is indeed a national crisis. And I'm not alone in that sobering view. You can see it almost every day on the editorial pages and op-ed pages of our major newspapers, from discouraged voters and from leaders in the business and political community, from House Speaker Paul Ryan to former Defense Secretary Robert Gates and Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz, and many more. And to an unfortunate degree, Washington is ground zero for these uncivil wars. The erosion of civility is both a symptom and a cause of dysfunctional government. It creates a vicious cycle, a downward spiral. And it's preventing us from tackling the big and urgent issues of the day. Important policy issues that you read about, study, and care about, from jobs to income inequality, to immigration reform, and caring for the environment and our planet. And it's hurting our ability to understand and deal with global threats, and to see and embrace global opportunities. But here's what worries me the most. The lack of civility is degrading the very quality of our democracy and the quality of our lives as living together as citizens. At a basic level, it's shaking our confidence in the decency of Americans. And survey after survey shows that the ugly tone in politics is considered to be a major problem by a very large majority of the voters. It's causing talented and patriotic Americans to turn away from careers in public service. And it's helping to drive public trust in our institutions to all-time lows. A recent respected poll reported that nearly all Americans, 95%, say civility is a problem. To get 95% of Americans to agree on anything is a pretty tall order. With 3/4 of the country saying civility has declined in the past few years, which I think we would agree with, and 2/3 of the country saying it was a major problem. So based on that, the future health of our country depends really on reclaiming at least some measure of cooperation, of collaboration, and compromise. Now, look, clearly this is easier said than done. But it's time really to move forward, to act, and I think we need to begin now. And I think one way to start is by puncturing 3 dangerous myths about civility and integrity that have become pervasive in Washington and elsewhere. These myths have found fertile ground in the current climate of anger and anxiety and cynicism, and they now threaten to sink deep roots. The first myth is that civility is a sign of weakness. This is the myth that rudeness, crudeness, and bullying are signs of strength. It's the myth by cutting off someone or making an offending remark is more honest or genuine than a conciliatory gesture. It's a myth that empathizing with an opponent or a competitor is to set yourself up for defeat. The second myth is that integrity means being inflexible. This is the myth that says a person with integrity does not compromise, that the person of integrity is one who would rather say no rather than say yes. This is the myth that says in order to safeguard your integrity, you must keep your mind largely shut, at least most of the time. And finally, there's a myth for those of us participating and working and striving to succeed in the real world, whether it's business or academia or politics, that civility and integrity somehow hold us back. This is the most pernicious myth of all, for the simple reason that the behavior it promotes can become habit-forming. This myth is based on the premise that you will only advance when others fail, that in order for you to win, someone else must inevitably lose. This is the myth that says civility and integrity are qualities that you can afford only once you've made it, when you have the luxury of success. Well, my experience on Main Street, Wall Street, and in the White House has taught me that these myths are just plain wrong. They misread the way the world works and the way people really are. And I'd like to give you 3 quick examples that have taught me that the opposite is true. First, I have seen how civility can be a sign of strength, of confidence, purpose, and persuasion. Shortly after I graduated from Congress, as President Knapp kindly noted, I was elected to the Arkansas legislature. It was a great honor to represent the people of my home county, and I will be mindful and grateful for that forever. The new governor of Arkansas at that time was a small-town lawyer named Dale Bumpers. Bumpers had an oratorical and political skill that was undeniable, but he also had a unique ability to bridge differences, to bring you over to his side of the bridge. Bumpers won with civility. He refused to run negative advertising or disparage his opponents, even though he was strongly urged to do so by his most influential supporters and his key campaign advisors. He took positions often that he believed were right, even when many voters disagreed. As a young lawyer, he went against the grain of public opinion by leading the racial integration of schools in his hometown of Charleston, Arkansas. As governor, he raised taxes to pay for and improve public education. And later, as United States Senator, he opposed public prayer in public schools and supported the signing of the Panama Canal treaties. Now, these were pretty tough positions to take for an elected official from a somewhat conservative state. And as a rookie legislator, I watched with admiration and awe as Governor Bumpers took on large personalities and large interest and won them over more often than not. He created a model for centrist, bipartisan state government, and he did it by building trust. He believed in the politics of respect, and it led him to get things done. His accomplishments created a progressive tradition in our home state that remains today. The second lesson that great leaders show us is that integrity is not defined by being inflexible. In fact, integrity makes principled compromise, a hallmark of our democracy, possible. On September 13, 1993, President Clinton hosted the signing of the Oslo Peace Accords between Israel and the Palestinians on the White House lawn. The Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, was a man of towering integrity and strength. And when the ceremony approached, he balked at shaking the hand of the Palestinian leader, Yasser Arafat. For Rabin, a former general, Arafat was a terrorist. And no matter how far they had traveled in the peace process, this simply seemed like one step too far. Finally, President Clinton pulled Prime Minister Rabin aside and said, "You're going to have to shake his hand." Rabin was silent for a moment. We all waited anxiously for his reply. And then he said in a loud voice, "Okay, but no kissing." And that produced one of the most historic handshakes in the history of the Middle East. Rabin's integrity gave force to that agreement. Lastly, civility and integrity are not obstacles to success in the real world. On the contrary, they are ingredients of a lasting personal fulfillment. I would respectfully suggest to you that they are the ultimate long-term investments. My formative years in business, as again President Knapp noted, was in transportation and energy. In my early 20s, I returned to my hometown of Hope to join my father, who was a wonderful mentor, partner, and certainly father, and our then third-generation family business in automobile sales and heavy-duty truck leasing. Today, our fourth-generation family business has ventures here in the United States, as well as Brazil and Mexico and China, led by our two sons. The automotive industry and the natural gas business are highly competitive. They are filled with colorful characters and rugged individuals. And yet, I have consistently found that civility and integrity are keys to negotiating deals that build businesses and successful careers. It really comes down to trust. Do your colleagues and partners trust you? Do your customers and clients trust you? And even your competitors, do they see you as an honest broker? In business and in public life, the biggest achievements often come not because your friends and allies trust you, although that's very important. They happen because you've earned the trust and respect of your competitors or even your adversaries. Trust is formed through relationships and reputation. I've learned never to underestimate the power of relationships or the personal touch. Lasting relationships cannot be superficial or transactional. They require, and I think all of you know this, listening and nurturing and sincerity and a giving of yourself. And I assure you that good reputations cannot be manufactured overnight. They come from an accumulation of countless individual actions over time. In other words, you have to work at it. And this is the message that I would respectfully offer to those of you who are starting your careers. Civility and integrity are all about the choices that you make. You can choose to see risk and opportunities through the eyes of others, a hallmark of civility. And with globalization, this is becoming an increasingly essential skill. Civility enables you to find common ground with people of very different backgrounds, beliefs, interests, languages, and in the process, it's almost certain that it will open your eyes to new possibilities. You can choose to invest in building long-term relationships with integrity. Digital technologies, which you certainly understand much better than I do, are a help. But I think they can also be a hindrance as well. No question, social media platforms provide limitless potential for new connections. You know that, you get it, you understand it. But they can also breed a cynicism or superficiality. There is no app for creating instant trust. It takes patience, persistence, and being present with other people. You can choose to direct your talents and energies outward towards helping and inspiring others. Civility is certainly the language of optimism, and one of your most illustrious graduates of George Washington School of Business, Secretary Colin Powell, commented about leadership saying, "Perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. People who are optimistic get things done." Civility and integrity help us get the big things done, and especially the most difficult things. Our first president knew this. Many of you are familiar with the text that helped inspire your first-year development program and this annual lecture. As a young schoolboy in Virginia, George Washington copied out by hand a list of what were called rules of civility and decent behavior in conversation and company. Rules of civility and decent behavior in conversation and company. And historians have said that these rules had a profound effect on Washington for the rest of his life. So in preparation for tonight, I recently looked through that list, 110 in all. Now, a lot of these rules were products of their time. Take rule number 9, which says, "Spit not into the fire, nor stoop low before it. Neither put your hands into the flames and warm them, nor set your feet up on the fire, especially if there be meat before it." Okay, got it. Other rules speak to us across the century. Rule number 1 advises us, every action done in company ought to be done with some sign of respect to those who are present. But the entry that made the biggest impression on me was the very last one. Rule of civility number 110. And I'd like you to hear what Washington wrote in his schoolboy hand. "Labor to keep alive in your breast that little spark of celestial fire called conscience." What a wonderful phrase. Keep alive that little spark of fire called conscience. Reading that reminded me that civility and integrity are indeed matters of conscience. They connect us to ourselves and to each other as individuals. But they also connect us to higher powers of family and community and faith. And that little spark, like the spark in Washington's time, ignited a revolution and produced a new, free, and independent country. And ever since, that spark of conscience has illuminated some of our nation's brightest moments. Today in Washington, we face some daunting challenges to restore credibility and effectiveness to our most basic, important institutions. We have work to do. We have work to do to keep alive people's optimism, and belief and faith in the American promise in freedom and fairness and opportunity. So I would suggest tonight that civility and integrity are two essential tools for this historic job. And it's time we put them to use. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Those were wonderful remarks and a wonderful way to kind of cap off the honor code. I want to introduce the Honorable Mark Kennedy, who's joined us up here. He is the director of the Graduate School of Political Management here at George Washington University, and he and Mac have been friends for a number of years, and it's because of Mark that we have Mac with us today. So thank you for that. And then Mark will actually be leaving us to go to the University of North Dakota as president this summer. So this will be one of his last, I think, public events here. So congratulations.
Congratulations.
I want you all to be thinking about some questions that you have for our two distinguished guests, but I'm going to start with something. So you just quoted George Washington and shared some of his rules of
it was
civility.
appropriate to do
Yes,
so.
Very appropriate. I think that's one of the best things about being at a university like this. You've got lots of great quotes to share. So if George Washington were on this stage tonight and the 5 presidential candidates were sitting out in the audience, and you both get to answer this question, what would George Washington tell our 5 presidential candidates that they should be doing maybe differently than they are right now in the campaign?
Well, if you imagine that image, first of all, I think there might be a groundswell of support for George Washington if he stepped on that stage.
Might just get reelected, huh?
And it does go to the old saying, don't compare me to the Almighty, compare me to the alternative. And we have to look at our candidates, I think, in that light. I would hope and I believe he might say something along the lines that this is a government of, for, and by the people. It's meant to serve the people. It's meant to help lift lives. And in this day and time, which I am sure he would understand the interconnected world that we live in, he would say that our country, the United States, is leadership around the world is absolutely critical. And given his distinguished military career and leadership, he would probably talk about keeping our country safe, which is the most sacred responsibility of any commander-in-chief. And I think by the time he finished that commentary, which would border on a lecture, which he would have the standing to give, I would hope that our 5 candidates would pick up on it, understand it, and follow through in terms of at least trying to establish some framework to honestly disagree, which is part of a democracy, but to work together to solve problems, to seize opportunities, and make this country better now and for future generations.
Mark, what would you like to add to that?
Well, I'd first of all agree with everything Max said, but I think he would say you're taking my name in vain too often. Because why we don't have integrity is because the political process has been for a long time, since the bog down in Vietnam, or since Nixon got impeached. They've been running against Washington. So on both sides, we run against Washington. We go home and we say, you constituents are all right. I can't understand why Washington won't give you what you want. I'm going to go fix Washington. But the trouble is, as Mac knows, Houston doesn't always agree with Boston. In fact, they rarely do. And it's not Washington that's broken, it's that we have division within America. And it's become so bad that 1 out of 3 on each side thinks the other side is dangerous for America. So I think he would say, listen, I was worried about parties, as Washington was. we need to understand that there are differences. The only thing we have on our symbol is e pluribus unum. That means out of many one. That means we need to consider both Boston and Houston when we're making decisions.
So one of the statistics that you quoted was, and I'm not sure I'm going to get it exactly right, but that 97% of people felt like civility was important, or that it was a problem. We weren't doing it as effectively. But yet, when you watch the polls, people seem to vote completely contrary to thinking that civility is important. I would be interested to hear kind of both of your perspectives on it. It might actually get to Mark some of what you're saying about people, in different parts of the country with different political views feel so strongly about that. But why are we seeing that disconnect between people thinking that civility or the lack of it is a problem, but yet that doesn't seem to be playing out in how they're voting, at least so far in the elections?
All of the students here have been very patient and respectful, and they have other things to do later in the evening, so we could talk about this a long time, but we won't, rest assured. I think it's a very good question. There's clearly a disconnect. I think part of this is the failure of really putting country first. There's such an emphasis, former Congressman Kennedy, as you know, on primaries and raising money, which is also becoming a real issue in our political system. And so that lends itself to polarization and hyper-partisanship. And people are penalized for working across the aisle as opposed to being rewarded. That's why I gave the very truthful and real example of Dale Bumpers, who had a long, distinguished, and just a wonderful and meaningful career. So I think that's the disconnect. And what it really suggests, Dean Livingstone, is it's up to all of us as citizens, as we participate in democracy, to send the right message, encourage our leaders to do the right thing. Because ultimately, if those attack ads or negative campaigning or whatever resonate with us, the voters, we have a responsibility in this too, then that's kind of the ultimate answer. So there's clearly a disconnect, but I continue to believe that the message that will win at the end of the day in the general election, primaries are pretty hard-fought contests, that's a different landscape, will be a positive one about a vision for our country.
Mark, what would you add to that?
I would just say that part of the reason it's divisive in primaries is because not enough people vote in primaries. So if you aren't voting in the primary, you're part of the problem. The other part of the reason it's a problem is that we've self-sorted. 3 out of 4 people that live in the city vote liberal. 3 out of 4 people that live in the country vote conservative. And they generally all agree with each other. And they just can't understand why that other side don't agree with me. The other thing, though, I would say, though, is emails are forever. If you look at the traffic on social media talking about politics, it is far more negative than anything politicians would say on TV or personally. So really, my guess is if I tracked all the email traffic and all the social media traffic in the audience today, I might see some negativity. And so we need to look at the mirror and make sure that we're being constructive in all of our dialogues as well.
So I'm going to turn to the audience and see if we have some questions from any of our folks in the audience. We have some microphones out there, so if you'd raise your hand, we'll bring it to you. And tell us your name and introduce yourself as you ask the question.
Hi, my name is Dominic Segura. I'm a freshman in the business school, obviously. My question is, how do you respond to the view that today's political situation is the result of the outgrowth of civility to things such as trigger warnings and microaggressions? Thank you.
Outgrowth of, repeat the question again, I'm not sure I quite got it. Outgrowth of civility, microaggression, I didn't catch the part in between.
Yeah, the outgrowth of civility to things such as trigger warnings and microaggressions.
So the connection between what's happening with civility and some of the discussions we're having about trigger warnings and microaggressions, is that what you're trying to understand? Okay. Do you want to start with that? Given that you're going to get to be a university president, this is a good question to answer, Mark.
It may be
well, microaggressions, I'm not sure I got exactly the point to it. I mean, Mac commented on some people think that we've been too civil in Washington and we haven't got anything done and I haven't gotten my way, which goes back to my point of view. We've already spent all the money we're ever going to spend in Washington. Somebody needs to tell you we probably need to do the opposite of what every politician is telling you. If you look at the balance of the budget, we probably are going to need to raise taxes. We probably are going to need to cut spending. And so we haven't been telling you the truth of what we've been doing. We haven't been doing enough compromising. We haven't been doing enough adjusting. And so the real challenge is people don't want to hear that because they're in their own little bubble and they don't understand why everybody just can't agree with them. But there is a link between the lack of understanding that we have to compromise, that the civility is needed, and frustration with why can't I have my way?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is part of your question suggests an assertiveness, almost a combativeness that we see in current politics and for that matter, business and more broadly. I personally think that's not only destructive, I just don't think it's a successful strategy for getting things done. And let me be very clear in talking about civility and integrity, and as we talk about the political or business landscape, that there are certain issues that you just simply are not going to be able to agree on. So I'm not remotely suggesting a lack of partisanship or strong beliefs in certain positions. But on the other hand, life is full of choices and compromises. And at the end of the day, if you have a relationship, and Dick talked about this in his comments, or Trustee Blackburn talked about this in his comments, if you have a relationship with someone, your odds go up, I think, immeasurably of frankly persuading them, or at least persuading them largely to the position you believe is the right one. So that's really not only in my judgment, and it seems to have worked out reasonably well for me over the years, it's a successful strategy, whether it be in business or politics. And I think an aggressive, assertive, microaggressive, just exactly going to your question, I think that's not a winning formula.
Do we have other questions from the audience? Yes, down here. Okay.
You've got a microphone. Mic right here. Hi, Christine Brown-Quinn, MBA 92, and member of the Dean's Board of Advisors. The question I have for you is, we talked about the government, and you mentioned social media. What I see, particularly sitting outside the country, is this civility is lacking within neighbors, friends. Social media not only is not constructive, but people seem to have lost civility in discussion and dialogue. And if we know that that's important to relationships, why aren't we doing it? What has happened that there is so much uncivility in our communities?
Well, the world has changed since you graduated, and it's changed a lot since I graduated. And I think part of what's happened, and you've seen it develop in all forms of activities, we've had a 10-year century. We've had an accelerated pace of change in our country and around the world. Unthinkable changes have taken place in so many realms, whether it be the rise of China, how we look at things from a social standpoint. I mean, all of your generation understand this and are really right at the forefront. We've also had a tremendous change in how we communicate in terms of both television, where there used to be 3 newscasts and everybody kind of got the same message and the same facts in one medium. Now that's totally fragmented with our news, the way we take in our news and the way you take in your news daily. So I think all of that has led us to a more inward, or it could lead us to a more inward look, where we don't engage with other people. And I would say that that's what I tried to make the point, despite the enormous connectivity that modern technology brings, and such critical, it's indispensable, but it does not replace true, strong relationships, whether it be within a community or whether it be within another sphere to a colleague either in your hometown or around the world.
And I think as Richard Blackburn said, you're going to have to work with other people. And the biggest skill is going to be the necessary understanding of different points of view and figuring out how you get them across the bridge like bumpers.
Yeah,
and that requires both integrity and civility. I always took the approach in Congress, I may agree with you on only 1 out of 100 issues, but we can work together on that one issue. I worked together with Rahm Emanuel. I worked together with Nancy Pelosi. But if I was uncivil to them on the other 99 things we disagree on,
Wouldn't get there.
we would have never worked together. So I think these are two very important topics for being successful in business or in politics.
And what I hear both of you saying is that building the relationship is really important, even if you don't agree on things. And having that relationship allows you then on the things that you can work together on to be able to do that effectively.
You'll live a long life and you'll have many opportunities to work with them on something else.
Yeah, it's important in business, politics, and just think about it from an international standpoint of building a relationship and trust.
I think we have time for one more question from the audience. Do we have another hand up there? Yes, at the back.
Hi, I'm Jake. I'm a FYDP mentor. I'm a sophomore in the business school. So you both spoke a lot about how there are drivers pushing us away from civility and politics. Can you both speak to some drivers that are pushing for incivility in the business world, things that us as young professionals we can look for to try to change? Thank you.
Very good question. I think the unrelenting pressure, certainly for public companies to report quarterly earnings, bring forth a short-term view on how you conduct your affairs, and that in and of itself brings forth, I think, can bring forth a hardness, a drive, which leads to incivility as opposed to looking at the longer term. I think also that just the general feeling of a lack of trust, a lack of commonality, you have to work a little harder to build those relationships than you did. So there's some forces working against you. But again, I would go back to my basic point. I think that the strategy for winning is to establish those relationships, establish the trust, both with your friends, colleagues, but also your competitors and even your adversaries. I think in the long run, that's the winning strategy.
And I think you're going to face competition in business just as you do in politics as to who's going to get that next rung up the ladder, who's going to get rated better, who's going to get the better increase in salaries. So I've spent more of my life in business than in politics. It's competitive there, but the same rules that Mac talked about apply to business as well.
Well, I think we're going to bring this evening to a close and be respectful of everyone's time. So let's give them a hand.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
And what I would say, I loved the last rule of, I guess he wasn't president then, he was a teenager, younger than the folks in the audience here. Where are you guys? 110 rules. You haven't done that yet in your lives?
Well, they've got their oath of honor. They're doing pretty well.
Yeah, they got the oath of honor. That's good. So, celestial spark of conscience.
That's it.
Celestial spark of conscience. So I would encourage you to reflect on the oath that you just took, but also to think about how you can nurture in yourself and in each other that celestial spark of conscience that you can grow and develop and take with you for the rest of your lives. So thank you so much for sharing your insights tonight. And Mark, thank you for joining us as well. I'm going to ask President Knapp to come up and help us. We have a special plaque in recognition of Mr. McClarty and his time with us this evening. Thank you all so much for being with us. Richard, Blackburn, Nancy, what a pleasure it is to have you with us, and thank you so much for your legacy with this and the impact it's having on the school and the university and all of our students. So have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for being here.